Hello everybody and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I work within the Standards, Regulatory and Thought Leadership part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the implications of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide, right across the property cycle, all the way through land, planning and development, construction, finance, brokerage, valuation, building operation and end of life, and indeed working across all the various asset types of land itself, residential, commercial, alternative assets and infrastructure, there's clearly a hugely broad canvas upon which data and technology is having a profound and positive effect on the built environment. And today I'm really pleased to have David Fleming join me again from Mitigo. Please do join me, David.
Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, very well. Great to have you on again. And I guess for the benefit of perhaps those who've not seen our previous conversations, it'd be great to get a bit of your backstory and a bit of an origin story of Mitigo before we get into the bits and bytes of things.
Well, I suppose my backstory is mainly about digital banking. So post the financial crash, I found myself head of digital banking at the combined Lloyds banking group. You remember that Halifax got smashed into Lloyds, etc. And it's easy to forget, well, that's 2009 and internet banking just wasn't that big. It was all about branches and telephony. And we just had a tremendous time building assets and apps and functionality and capability. But along the side of that became a completely different risk profile from the bank. You know, passports into branches and looking at faces was no longer the solution. So you had to become a cybersecurity expert. So I won't go the full story to the firm, but you know that's how I started up with a couple of other founding partners, Mitigo Cybersecurity, and bringing those expertise into play for professional services sectors.
Indeed, thanks. Well, I know in previous conversations we've talked about various aspects of cybersecurity because obviously this is a generic issue for the profession to address, irrespective of which of those kind of specialisms and asset types I mentioned in my introduction. And today we wanted to chat specifically about email security. So I guess what would be interesting, I think, to begin with is really on the kind of slightly depressing side is what are kind of the common approaches you see that bad actors use to try and attack email accounts?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? In your intro, you talk about technology and data, and it's a good thing. You know, it's made huge impacts and productivities for the people you talk to in your audience. But equally, it gives opportunities to fraudsters. And email, people think quite narrowly about how to protect email, but it's a huge part of our everyday lives. It's probably the biggest thing that we interact with from a technology stance. Therefore, where the criminal is going to go, they're going to go into something we're using the whole time, and you know, obviously they're moving to SMS a little bit more. So there are. It's always important to think about the types of attack, the approach. Industry would call it vectors. You'd hear that word, but you know how are they trying to get into your email and use it to exploit you? Well, there are four broad methodologies. The one that everyone's heard of is phishing. So phishing is trying to get you to give away login credentials. Simplistically, you know, back in the day, it was your bank account email coming to you, so you know, trying to pretend so you give away your username and password. But now they're trying to do Office 365. Obviously, the biggest proportion will be on Office 365. They do Gmail. They'll look at iCloud. They'll look at Amazon. You know, they can fake the look at those emails so convincingly these days. And the email addresses are getting better and better. And we're in such a rush. Bosh, you give away your username and password. And by the way, phishing is sometimes real time now. So you give away your MFA, your multi-factor token too at the same time. So that's by far the biggest, and then everyone would know about. If you then move on, the next one is to attach a malicious, not as easy to say as all the time, a malicious attachment to an email. And what this is trying to do is, you know, get you to click on it. It'll look like a PDF or it'll look like a voice message that you've missed. More and more as we go remote, people have moved to kind of IP phones. So it's not that unusual to get, oh, you missed a call. There'll be a bunch of people listening to this and going, I do get that. And the criminals will exploit these changes in behaviors and know that we're just going to rush to click on something. What that then does we'll come on to, but what they're trying to do is to get some programs, some software onto your local computer. So that's the second approach, is an attachment to an email. The third one is to do with, you might call it brute force attack, takeover of an account. There are various tools where you can go and look at the dark web to see whether your username and password has been lost. So if you've been using your work email on Amazon or LinkedIn, or Under Armour, there's loads of places that have had their own breaches and they've lost emails and username and passwords. So you can go and buy these on the dark web. So criminals the whole time have engines and robots just firing it. Oh, we've got some new lists. Let's fire them at Office 365. Let's fire it to iCloud. So there's just that brute force of where you've lost emails before, and then they're inside your attack. And then fourthly and finally, the other one is more targeted. Really, those other ones are fairly, they're fairly blanket. They just aim it at huge audiences because it's a small percentage that will click. But if they can get 2-3 of millions, then they're getting into a lot of emails. But the final one is normally a bit more targeted. It's spoofing. So they are pretending to be somebody in your business or a supplier to your business, tricking you into an action that they want from you. So the email will come in and it'll be from Andrew to me, and if I don't look closely enough, I'll think it is you. They're not inside your account. They're pretending to be you with clever technology that makes it look more and more convincing. And we'll get on to what they're trying to trick you into do. But those are the 4 vectors, we might say. That's how they're approaching. And when we understand that and the consequences, you can start to piece together the defenses you have to put in place.
Indeed, and certainly from personal experience, perhaps betraying my age here, but over the years, I've certainly seen, if we just think of phishing emails, a real step change in the sophistication and the polish, dare I say it, because in the early days, you'd see an email and it was frankly a fairly sort of poor imitation of a bank logo and a very obvious email address that was spoofed, and to be blunt, very poor English if it was directed towards English-speaking people. But I've certainly seen, as you say, emails purporting to come from Office 365, which to me looked almost indistinguishable from the real thing. So I think it's really worth perhaps impressing upon people that these are really sophisticated emails now, aren't they, in terms of their look and feel?
They are really sophisticated. One of the things that we do is all of our clients send in things they're not sure about. So we blow them up on our safe system so we can see what happens. And what we're seeing, you can see the development of the criminals. They'll see a defense will come in place, and the next time we see an attack, we'll see a new bit of code that's getting around that defense. So this is a proper industry now. Previously, it was a little bit more kind of a cottage industry, if you like. It's now proper criminals with automation, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. So if you're listening to this and thinking, that's the other fools, it's not. Pretty sharp people fall for these if you're not really got the right defenses in place.
Indeed. So, as I say, before we move on to the optimism of what we can do to defend, what are the typical consequences? What are people trying to achieve with these?
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing for people to understand, because we sometimes think as cyber as this theoretical thing that's part of business. It's not. These are criminals. You got to think what they're after, and of course, they're after money. If they can't turn what they've stolen into cash, then they're not really going to be interested. It's going to die away quickly. They're not on the whole doing this for fun. There's some odd exceptions, but they are exceptions. So the biggest one that happens at the moment is they're trying to get in the way of a payment. And we see this in all industries, but where money transactions are moving, once they get inside your email, they're trying to find invoices that are being paid, transactions that are happening, people that you're having conversation with, services to, or perhaps internal movements of money from an executive and a PA moving money to a wife kind of thing we've seen. So they'll do sophisticated searches within your inbox. They'll put in rules to hide the conversation, and then they'll have a conversation. And the next thing you know, if you're paying for a whole bunch of materials coming somewhere, the money's gone to the wrong bank, and it can either hit you or your clients, which is equally damaging. So that's the biggest one we see, is where they're attempting to divert a payment somewhere. And I think most people are only one step away from that story. Most people will have heard of something similar in their network. That's by far the biggest. The second biggest is where they're just trying to infect as many accounts as possible. So they get inside, normally real-time phishing, and then there'll be an automated, what's called a script, but an automated bit of software that will look at every email address you've ever had in your email and then send a fraudulent email to them. Now that is typically, the number ends up, because email engines limit it, but that's quite often 4,000 to 5,000 emails that will go out within a short space of time from you to every email you've ever been in contact with. It doesn't have to be one of your contacts. It can be somebody copied within an email. That's how the script works. And guess what's in there? It's a link to another bit of either phishing or malware that's trying to either take over their machine or their account. So it's a way of propagating it, and this went mad last year. And it is from you. It is from you. So people are going to click it. That's why they do it, because it's much more realistic. They click in and go, and whether they realize or not, they haven't done it. So that's the second thing they're trying to do, is propagate and take. If you imagine, the more accounts they can take over, the more they might find money transactions. And the third one is ransomware. So all of those ones, in terms of approaches, can end up with them getting a foothold on a machine or in a system that allows them then to propagate some kind of ransom attack. Now, ransomware, to remind everyone, I think people have heard lots of ugly stories, and it is really ugly because it tends to finish a business. They'll come in and they will encrypt your business applications, systems, data, documents, and bring you to a grinding halt. Backups may get you up, but on the whole, we see that backups have been done in a way that you're down for a number of days and you rarely get everything back. But they have a double go at you. You and I have talked about this before, I think, Andrew, but they have a double go, because backups will help some people. Then they threaten you and say, do you think your customers would like to know that we've got all your data? We're going to start to publish it. So it's literally blackmail to try and then get you to pay a ransom fee. Very sophisticated websites that you can go on and pay the fee, and whilst there's lots of guidance not to, a proportion do, and there's a big market there for the criminals. So those are the three. They're trying to get a ransom fee from you, they're trying to divert money, or they're trying to just infect as many accounts as possible so they can do the first two with those accounts too.
Indeed. Well, let's lighten the mood a bit, David, and look at what we can actually do. And I guess, as ever, there's not one thing, it's multiple things that give that depth of protection, isn't it?
Depth is the word. So depth is the word. You never know at which point there's a vulnerability going to show up, either in software or in a human being, or in something that your business has changed, like a new bit of software, that the criminals then exploit that change. So you have to have strength in depth, and also you can't rely on humans. I'm afraid we do thousands of simulated attacks a year, and we get the odd 0% clicking, but mostly, even after all the training and the simulation, it's 5%. So you can't just rely on people's competence, but you start there. That's where you start the competence, because the first thing is making sure that people have appropriate use of their email account. Now, it's difficult if you've been in a business for a long time, but people should not be using their business email account for personal, opening up personal accounts, whether it's a file transfer system or whether it's just a bit of a news app that they're interested in. They need to keep that inside. The more you use that in the world, the more likely it is to be stolen along with the password and turn up into one of these robots that I've said. So that's number one. And number two, I suppose, is a little bit more foundational, is that for some of your smaller businesses, they might be relying on basic bank account systems. So you really need to be paying for, even for the first level of Gmail and 365. It's a $5 or a $10. It's not a huge amount per month per person. We find people, smaller businesses, on the basic accounts where there's no filters, there's no controls, there's no alerts, and you really are on a hiding to nothing, because then you are just relying on human beings. So that's arguably the first thing you have to do, is go and make sure you've got a business grade email account. So the third one, I've talked about not using your emails everywhere. The third one is having a good password policy, and preferably better authentication. So you probably wouldn't be surprised the number of times we go and audit a business and look at vulnerabilities, and we find that password is a dog's name's 123, dog's name, we see it on every single login. That's just not good enough, especially for email. If you're on Office 365, there's so many crown jewels in there. It needs to be a unique, strong password with multi-factor authentication in, i.e. username, password, and something else, which can be authenticator app or a code to your phone. That doesn't solve everything, but you're chipping away at the risk when you're doing that.
And David, on that particular point, I know there's been debate over the years. What are your thoughts and recommendations on how regularly passwords are changed? Because there's almost a negative effect. If you get people to change passwords too quickly, they end up writing them down because they can't remember that sort of tempo. What's your recommendation on when you should be changing and updating passwords?
So you should only change them if you believe that you have used it somewhere else, or you believe it to be compromised. Make it strong, and then frankly leave it. You might have an annual renewal, but absolutely it drives the wrong behavior. You force people to do it, and then they I'm busy and you just forced me to do a password, and you just get generic reuse, and they make it simpler and simpler. We are quite fans of using password vaults, because then you can press a button and you just get an impossible password, but your machine unlocks that for you. So yeah, we're definitely in the camp of that fast rotation can lead to more problems than it solves.
Indeed. Thanks, David.
So we've touched a bit on what individuals can use, but now you get into, right, let's try and make sure that that's the backstop. So once you've moved to a business email account, they've got brilliant inbound filters, but people don't like setting them. They're scared of setting them because they think it's going to hide stuff. They think they're going to lose that really important email. Microsoft and Google, who are the two biggest, they have so much information about the frauds out there, and yet people don't switch some of the simple inbound filters off. So you can either make sure the stuff never gets seen, or at least goes into a spam file for somebody to have a closer look at. You can tweak these to be very, very accurate. It's probably not criminal not to, but for me it feels to, because that you're putting your staff at risk by not getting some of these really. You and I spoke about it a few minutes ago. They're so clever, but if you can get them into spam or into quarantine, you've saved that potential click. The second one is to do with spoofing mostly. So do you know what I'm talking about when I say a domain?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to make the assumption that you're talking about, and if we think of, obviously, classically the kind of Microsoft concept, you've got your Andrew Knight at RICS.org, so you've got that kind of domain name that we would recognize from a website, but actually probably technically is now how that sort of set of servers and internal network is described to the outside world.
Absolutely. So it's the bit that I'm talking about in email is that last bit, that domain. Now you've had to buy that from somewhere. So somebody has given you a domain name, it's yours, it's registered. There's a control panel in that website that nobody then goes back and looks at, which has 3 domain keys that need to be set to stop you being spoofed. It's not 100% foolproof, but it's SPF, DMARC, DKIM, 3 things that need to go and be set up. You'll need some specialist help for for it, but that stops most spoofs coming. So I can no longer pretend to be Andrew Knight if you set those up properly, because it will go, no, none of this matches. It's like putting some little bits of evidence in a central office that it comes in, looks at those, looks at you and goes, no, that's not right. And it'll go quarantined, or it will never get to the user. But not many people have set them up.
So David, this is essentially the plumbing of the internet and making sure that that domain name, that RICS.org, that Mitigo.com, whatever it is protected in a way that people simply can't impersonate it or spoof, as the language is used.
Exactly. Yeah, good summary. So then I think part of this is almost compliance and governance, is about training your staff and proving that you're making an attempt to stop them. It actually appears at a high level in GDPR, talking about, are you getting your staff confident to defend people's personal data? Because of course, whilst I talked about the consequences to criminals, I didn't really touch on the regulatory consequences that are on the back of this. I was focusing on, why are the criminals doing it? They're not doing it to get you in trouble with the regulators, but it may get you in trouble with the regulators, depending on the data that you're holding. So train them, and we love simulated attacks. And I literally have just come out of the office where I was hearing a couple of people briefing our clients on the options. We will copy the things that are happening, whether it's a OneDrive fake, or whether it's a Google Drive fake, or it's a reset your password fake. Test people, and it drives behavior by people clicking on it, and they go, you shouldn't have clicked on that. And at least they're clicking on a simulation rather than a real one. And it does work. It does work.
I suppose that is a broader lesson, I think, isn't it, for the whole cyber debate, is this sense of stress testing and wargaming, to use various phrases, that it isn't a dry theoretical thing. You do need to almost get this experiential type learning for people in it, don't you?
The people that are getting into kind of gold class for cybersecurity defenses are testing things in theory rather than just assuming things are working. So, have you at least game planned your backup and says, right, this has happened. Where does my backup go? How quickly can I get to get back up from it, as an example? But also, cloud platforms looking at, if somebody overtook my laptop, could they get to it? Could they get to passwords? We do simple things like doing searches on people's systems for passwords and find files and files of passwords. So that's not high-tech internet stuff. That's just doing some assurance about, are people behaving the way they should do, and an Excel with everyone's password, and it's not the kind of behavior that fits with the policy of a good cyber-driven firm. Which it sort of gets me into, we're number 7, I think now, access methods. So what do I mean by access methods? So we like to talk about attack surface, and the more complicated you make your business about the way you can access things and how you do it, the more things you have to defend. So for example, on email, you can say the majority of your work is from, let's say, the Outlook application on your laptop. Is that the only way you're ever going to work? Well, actually, yes, it is for me. Well, then you can, in the background, shut off those other channels that could be exploitable by criminals. Now, then you get to the difficult one, is, can people do it on their phone? Do you want them to use the native email on the phone, or do you want them to put the Outlook or the Google app on there? On the whole, the apps are more secure than the native. So you need to make decisions. Does anyone really need to be going onto a personal or an internet cafe, if they exist anymore, and going onto a browser and going into the login and going into the web email? You'll find it's a really small proportion, because that's one of the most attacked ways in. We'll switch it off in the background. So reduce the channels. If people can just use the app on their laptop, then you can really tighten up the security of emails. Now, this one is tangential in terms of, this is to do with the consequences. What is your payment method? So when you think about somebody's got inside your email and they found an invoice, they have to communicate and convince somebody to change the bank account details. Now that should be a big thing. Now for some of the smaller businesses listening to this, though, it may not be that you've got a department thinking about that, but you know, your bank needs to know that you're not going to change it, or your clients need to know you're not going to change it by an email. So have you got processes where the bank will always come to you first, or you have an internal checker that will make sure that people know, or have a, you know, communication with you, say, you know, we'll only ever call you if we're going to change it, or the other way around. If a client says, no, if a supplier says we've shifted, I don't know, materials somewhere, you know, you need to have a process that says you'll never accept that by email. So understanding your payment methods and processes and how people can raise new payees will stop a huge amount of the actual outcome. You may have been hit, but you've mitigated the consequence by having a payment process that didn't allow the payment to go through.
And I guess
Does
some
that
of
make
this,
sense? Because it can
yeah,
sometimes depend where the money's moving.
yeah, no, and I guess for me, it's also a reminder that sometimes protection here is about doing things in an old-fashioned way, picking up the phone and talking to somebody and saying, look, we've had this instruction. Is this correct? Can I confirm this with you verbally? So having that kind of old-fashioned human contact with people.
And it goes to the digitization of our worlds and our industries, where we're all doing it, and so many processes never get eyeballs on them anymore. So there are certain things that you have to have controls on that will make sure that you get a chance to intervene the edge cases, which interestingly takes me perfectly to items 9 and 10 on the top on the top things to do. So most people's antivirus is getting really sophisticated now, but people don't necessarily pay for that extra little bit of protection or switch stuff on. And also, if you've got Windows and Mac devices, you can set them to be a bit more sensitive to where you're browsing. The reason this is important is that in most cases, when you interact with an email that you shouldn't have done, it will try and take you to a website to either download something or to accidentally put your credentials in. If you've set up your antivirus and your Windows or your Mac browsing in a certain way, it will give you an alert. Rather than just assuming you know what you're doing, it will go, do you really want to go to this website? Because we found ones where people have had, in the background, there's an alert that's gone and said, this has been reported all over the world as a fraudulent website. Do you really want to go there? But that's not been switched on. It's in the background. The machine knows that's true, but nobody's ever switched it on to tell you that. So, you know, please get somebody to configure your antivirus and your browsers to protect the staff. These are retrospective controls because I've clicked on something here. But you know, it's a bit like the payment one. You get a little pop-up that brings a human to say, hang on, big red thing, do you really want to go to this site? And you can block those so they don't let people in at all. And that's sort of linked to number 10 as well, is that your antivirus and your browsing and your system and your computers, depending how big a firm you are and how sophisticated, will have alerts in the background. My favorite one is Office 365, and Google has this as well, has an alert in the background that says somebody has just set up an email rule. Would you like to go and investigate? It's an automatic one out of the box, but nobody switches on to go to anybody. Imagine if it's a bit like, I think people are quite used to iCloud ones, aren't they? Say, you know, you've just logged on to iCloud, was it you or Google? I think people are quite used to those little checks. So Office 365 has this one where, and you go, well, no, I didn't set up an email rule. That is one of the key things on the majority of the attacks, is that once they're inside your email, they want to hide the conversation. So they'll set up a little rule that says, right, I think I've got Andrew on the hook here. He's going to put money. So I don't want the real David Fleming ever seeing his reply. So I do a little rule saying, any email coming in from Andrew, please hide it and delete it from the inbox. So the real David Fleming never gets to see it, because the criminals are inside having a conversation with you. And that little alert, actually saying where those alerts are going to, would just allow you to stop that, because you would go, wow, I didn't do that, and you'd suddenly get into action mode. So that's number 10, is, you know, make sure that alerts are actually set up and going to somebody important. Well, not important, but somebody that cares, I suppose.
Indeed. Well, I suppose almost I'm going to use the word that I think perhaps I used at the beginning of this section. It's about depth here, isn't it? It's about multiple things. There's no one silver bullet. There's also perhaps a realistic assumption that occasionally, you know, somebody will get through. But if you've got these layers, if you've got these depths, you can pick it up, you can minimize any damage. So it is about having these multiple things happening. And I guess once again, being aware that it's a slightly moving target in terms of what people are doing and the kind of attacks that are happening.
I think that's a spot on summary. And when you think about it, I talked about, 3 or 4 different angles of attack. I talked about, 3 things they're trying to achieve. So what we're doing is mapping all of those paths in and saying, right, well, when I look at those journeys, I want at least 3 controls. One stopping it in the first place, one real time that gives you a chance to stop it when it's happening, and one in the background that will mitigate anything going on. So 3 times 3 times 4, you quite quickly get to 10, and that's why we're doing it. And as you say, arguably the most important thing that we've said there is that just you have to revisit it as well. The criminals, they're earning billions across the globe on this, or trillions actually by the latest estimate, but in the UK it's billions. And they're not just going to go away when you put multi-factor authentication on. We're now seeing half of the attacks that we go and sort out for people is what's called real-time phishing. So they take you to a fraudulent website, you key in your username and password, and you're logging them directly into your email. So you get an alert on your phone saying, here's the code, and you just type it in because they present you with the thing to type it in. Why wouldn't you if you've been tricked that far? So they're now starting to get around multi-factor authentication, and so the retrospective controls have to be in place to protect your business.
Indeed. Well, as ever, it's been hugely informative and a pleasure to talk to you about the, albeit a serious issue, David, but thanks as ever. And I look forward to our next discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew.